Welcome to episode 4 of the Psychological Safety Series for Nurses, brought to you by Healthcare Nurses Network and the Nurses Link Up app. In this episode, we take a step inward, because before we can create psychological safety in our teams, we must first build it within ourselves. Today's discussion is based on mastering psychological safety, why it starts with you before transforming your team, an article by Dr. Nicholas Abella. If you've ever hesitated to voice an idea, ask for help, or take a risk due to fear of judgment or failure, this episode is for you. Psychological safety is not just about teams, it's about overcoming self-doubt, perfectionism, and hesitation so that we can lead with confidence and create environments where others feel safe to do the same. Guiding this conversation are two experienced registered nurses. James Carter, BSN, RN, an ICU nurse who understands the pressures of bedside care and the challenges of speaking up in high-stakes environments. Emily Ramirez, MSN, RN, a nurse manager dedicated to fostering trust and open communication among teams. Together, they'll explore how self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and self-compassion are the foundation for stronger teams, better patient care, and leadership success. If you're ready to shift from fear-driven hesitation to confident action, let's dive in.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast, where we empower nurses with insights, strategies, and real-world solutions. Today we're diving into a topic that's so important for us all, psychological safety, and how it impacts you in your nursing career.
We'll be diving deep today, especially into some actionable tools you can use to boost your own sense of safety at work.
Exactly, using the RISE framework. We'll get to that in just a bit.
Sounds great.
It's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of our jobs, but have you ever found yourself holding back, from speaking up? Maybe you noticed something that seemed a little bit off, but hesitated to question, maybe a more senior colleague.
Right.
That's where psychological safety comes in, right?
Yeah, that's right. Psychological safety is, it's that feeling of confidence, that security that allows you to really be your authentic self at work without that fear of negative consequences. Being able to voice concerns, ask questions, even admit mistakes, knowing you won't be judged or penalized. And, there's even studies that show that hospitals with high psychological safety scores actually saw a 20% reduction in medication errors. That's huge.
Wow, 20%. That's a huge impact. So it's not just about, feeling good.
Yeah.
It really does affect patient care.
Yeah, it's not just touchy-feely. It really has real-world impact.
But we all know nursing comes with its own unique set of challenges. What are some of those internal barriers we face as nurses that can make psychological safety feel so hard to achieve?
Nursing is such a demanding profession. A lot of us struggle with that inner critic, right? That fear of failure, pressure to be perfect, all that self-doubt, that voice that whispers, what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
These are very real. These are common feelings.
Totally.
But they can lead to some serious consequences,
Okay. What kind of consequences are we talking about here?
Well, if you're constantly second-guessing yourself, you're afraid to speak up, you might hesitate to report a safety concern, or you might avoid asking for help even when you're overwhelmed. And that impacts the quality of care you can provide. And then just on a personal level, it can really hold you back from, taking on new challenges or, going for that promotion you deserve.
It's almost like those internal barriers create this ripple effect. It impacts everything from patient safety to our own career growth. So how do we break free from this cycle? This is where RISE comes in, right?
Exactly. RISE gives you a framework, a set of steps you can use starting today to cultivate that inner psychological safety.
Okay, let's break this down. What does RISE stand for?
It stands for reflect, integrate self-compassion, strengthen emotional intelligence, and embrace growth.
Love that it focuses on building that inner strength. Let's dive into each element of RISE, starting with reflect. What does that look like in practice?
So reflecting is all about becoming aware of those fear-based thoughts that are holding you back, and then challenging them.
Oh, okay.
Like putting those negative thoughts on trial. You examine the evidence instead of just blindly accepting them.
I used to struggle with that not good enough thought all the time. And it really helped me to start a journal. I would write down the negative thought and then actively look for evidence that either supported it or contradicted it. And more often than not, I realized those negative thoughts were completely unfounded.
That's a fantastic strategy.
Yeah.
And it highlights how powerful reflect can be. It's about shifting from being ruled by our fears to being guided by facts and a more balanced perspective.
So we've tackled those negative thoughts. What about integrate self-compassion?
Okay.
That one feels a little tricky for me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It can be. Think about it this way. How would you speak to a colleague who made a mistake? You wouldn't berate them, right?
Yeah.
You would offer support and understanding. Self-compassion is about extending that same kindness to yourself.
That's a great point. I think some of us worry that being self-compassionate means, like, letting ourselves off the hook, but it's not about ignoring our mistakes.
All right. It's about acknowledging your challenges without judgment and offering yourself that same support and understanding you'd offer to someone you care about.
So instead of beating yourself up over a mistake, you might say something like, hey, it's okay, everyone makes mistakes. What can I learn from this? How can I do better next time?
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly into strength and emotional intelligence. This is about learning to regulate your emotions, especially under pressure. Instead of reacting impulsively, you pause, breathe, and choose a more thoughtful response.
That pause is so powerful. It's like hitting the reset button. And I imagine it's especially important in those high-stress healthcare environments where things can escalate quickly.
Precisely. And don't forget, emotional intelligence also involves improving your communication skills.
So,
Learning how to express concerns clearly, respectfully, while also actively listening to others. That's key for building those strong relationships, which ultimately enhances psychological safety.
So we've reflected, we've shown ourselves some compassion, boosted our emotional intelligence. That brings us to E, embrace growth. I love this idea of reframing mistakes as learning opportunities.
It's such a powerful shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing mistakes as setbacks, we can view them as valuable feedback. One practical tip here is to create a learning log.
Ooh, I like that.
Whenever you make a mistake, jot down what happened, what you learned, and how you can apply that learning in the future.
That's brilliant. It turns those oops moments into stepping stones for growth. I think we've laid a great foundation here, exploring the importance of psychological safety and the power of RISE.
Absolutely. And remember, if you're looking for more support and resources, head over to healthcarenurses.net and check out our Nurses Link Up app available on Apple and Google Play.
We'll be back in part 2 to dive deeper into how to apply RISE in your specific nursing role, whether you're at the bedside, leading a team, or in an executive position. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast, where we're all about empowering you to create a more psychologically safe and supportive work environment. In part 1 of this deep dive, we really explored what psychological safety means and how it directly impacts you and introduced you to the RISE framework.
We talked about how those 4 elements, reflect, integrate self-compassion, strengthen emotional intelligence, and embrace growth, can help you build that inner confidence and resilience, which is so essential for nursing.
Now we're going to take things a step further and see how you can actually apply RISE in your specific nursing role, whether you're at the bedside, leading a team, or even in an executive position.
Yeah, let's do it.
So let's start with bedside nurses.
Okay.
You're the heart of patient care, often facing those high-pressure situations and internal barriers that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges I see for bedside nurses is that fear of making a mistake, especially when patient safety is on the line. And that's where reflect becomes so important, taking a moment to examine those fear-based thoughts.
So let's say you're about to ask a senior nurse for help with a procedure, but you hesitate because you don't want to seem incompetent. What would reflect look like in this situation?
It's about pausing, and asking yourself, is this thought really true? Would I judge a colleague for asking for help? Chances are the answer is no. We all need support sometimes, especially in a field as complex as healthcare. And remember what we talked about earlier, hospitals with strong psychological safety actually see a reduction in errors.
Right.
So asking for help, it's actually a sign of strength, not weakness.
That's such a good point. It really flips the script on how we view seeking help. And it brings us to integrate self-compassion. How does that play out for bedside nurses?
Instead of beating yourself up over a mistake, you treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer to a colleague. We're often our own harshest critics, Imagine a friend made the same mistake. What would you say to them? You'd be supportive, not judgmental.
That's so true. I know I've definitely been way harder on myself than I would ever be on a coworker.
Yeah.
So it's about replacing that negative self-talk with a more compassionate, I guess, inner voice.
Exactly. And remember, it doesn't mean ignoring mistakes, it's about learning from them. Speaking of learning, let's move on to strengthen emotional intelligence, a critical skill for any nurse, but especially those in leadership roles.
Okay, nurse leaders, this one's for you. You play such a vital role in shaping the culture of your team. How does emotional intelligence come into play here?
One of the most impactful things I think a nurse leader can do is model vulnerability.
Okay.
This means being willing to share your own struggles, your own mistakes, what you've learned along the way. It shows your team that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to ask for help.
I've seen that firsthand in a previous role. Our nurse manager was so open about her own learning journey, and it just created this atmosphere where we all felt so comfortable admitting when we didn't know something or needed support.
That's so wonderful to hear. And that's the power of leading by example. It shows your team that making mistakes isn't a sign of weakness. It's part of that process of learning and growing.
So modeling vulnerability makes it safe for others to be vulnerable, which then strengthens that psychological safety for the whole team.
What about emotional intelligence when it comes to like those tough conversations or conflict situations that inevitably arise in nursing?
That's where self-regulation is key. Before reacting emotionally, take a moment to pause, breathe, assess the situation. Ask yourself, what's going on for me right now? What's the most effective way to address this issue? That pause can make all the difference. It's like hitting that pause button on your emotions, which is so important in a high-pressure environment where things can escalate so quickly. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about CNOs and other healthcare executives. You're at the helm, you're setting the tone for the entire organization. How can you foster psychological safety on such a larger scale?
I think one of the most impactful things executives can do is integrate psychological safety training into leadership development programs.
Oh, okay.
Equipping nurse leaders with that knowledge and skills to actually cultivate safety within their teams will create that ripple effect across the entire organization.
So it's about creating that culture of psychological safety from the top down, empowering leaders at all levels to really champion this vital concept. And I imagine that goes hand in hand with prioritizing staff well-being, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's crucial to create those systems and policies that really support nurses' emotional and psychological health. This might include things like offering mindfulness training, stress reduction workshops, or even just ensuring access to mental health resources. When leaders prioritize well-being, it signals that it's okay for everyone to do the same.
It's about creating that work environment where nurses feel valued, supported, and empowered to bring their best selves to work each day. But what about those of us who might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but what if I'm just not naturally a confident person?
That's a great question. Here's the good news. Confidence is not a fixed trait. It's a skill that you can develop over time. And Rise gives you the tools to do just that. Start by taking small, courageous actions in safe environments.
Could you give us an example of what, like, a small, courageous action might look like?
Absolutely. It could be something as simple as sharing an idea in a staff meeting, speaking up about a safety concern during a huddle, or even just asking a question when you're unsure about something. The key is to step outside of your comfort zone bit by bit.
And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. It's like exercising a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
That's a great analogy. And remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Just pick one small action to focus on this week. Write it down, put it somewhere you'll see it every day, and commit to taking that step.
I love that. Those small steps can lead to really big changes over time. But I know some of our listeners might be thinking, this is all well and good, but I'm already so stretched thin. Where am I going to find the time for self-reflection and emotional intelligence work? What would you say to that?
It's understandable to feel that way, especially in a profession as demanding as nursing. But even small, consistent efforts can have a big impact. You don't need to carve out, like, hours in your day.
I think we often get caught up in this all or nothing mindset, like we need to dedicate these huge chunks of time to see any benefit, and that's simply not true.
Right, even 5 minutes of mindfulness practice, a quick self-compassion break, or just consciously pausing before reacting in a stressful situation can make a difference.
It's about finding those little pockets of time throughout your day to prioritize your well-being. Maybe it's taking a few deep breaths before you walk into a patient's room, or using your commute to reflect on your day and practice some self-compassion. Little by little, those moments add up.
Exactly. And remember, the more you practice these RISE skills, the more natural they will become. Before we wrap up this part, let's just recap some key takeaways for applying RISE in your nursing role. Bedside nurses, challenge those fear-based thoughts, be kind to yourself, and don't hesitate to ask for help.
Nurse leaders, model vulnerability for your team. Work on that emotional intelligence, especially when it comes to handling conflict, and foster a culture where everyone feels safe to speak up.
And CNOs and executives, remember psychological safety starts at the top. Integrate it into your leadership programs, champion staff well-being, and lead by example.
And for everyone listening, if you're looking for more support, head over to healthcarenurses.net and check out our Nurses Link Up app, available on Apple and Google Play. It's a great way to connect with other nurses, share experiences, and find encouragement.
We'll be back in part 3 to talk about how to turn all of this into lasting change. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast. We've been going deep on psychological safety and how the RISE framework can help you feel more confident and empowered at work.
We've talked about why it matters, those sneaky internal barriers that can hold us back, and how to apply RISE, whether you're at the bedside, leading a team, or even in an executive position.
Now it's time to talk about how to turn all of this into lasting change, both for yourself and for the nursing profession as a whole.
Yeah.
Because, let's be real, psychological safety isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing journey.
It really is. You're absolutely right. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels safe to speak up, to share ideas, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. But that doesn't happen overnight.
So where do we even begin? What's that one thing our listeners can do today to start building a more psychologically safe environment for themselves and their colleagues?
Well, remember, change starts with you. We challenged you in the last part to pick one element of RISE that really resonated with you and commit to a small, courageous action. Did you do it? If not, there's no better time than now.
I love that. Even if it's something small, like pausing for a few breaths before you respond in like a stressful situation,
Right.
or intentionally replacing a negative thought with a more compassionate one, those small shifts in mindset, they can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of those small actions. They might seem insignificant on their own, but over time, they create a ripple effect. When you start showing up with more confidence and authenticity, it really does inspire others to do the same.
Yeah, it's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world. But let's get real for a minute. Some days are just harder than others.
Yeah.
What happens when those feelings of self-doubt, that fear, creep back in? What do we do?
That's completely normal. We all have those days. The key is to remember those tools that you've learned through RISE. Go back to that learning log that we talked about. Reflect on those negative thoughts, challenge them, and offer yourself some self-compassion.
It's like having a toolkit for your mind. When those challenging emotions pop up, you have a plan for dealing with them. But it's not just about individual change, right? How do we advocate for psychological safety on like a larger scale within the nursing profession as a whole?
Speaking up is crucial. Talk to your colleagues, your nurse manager, your CNO, share the research, the benefits, the strategies we've discussed. Advocate for integrating psychological safety training into your workplace, for creating systems that support well-being.
It's about creating that collective voice, a movement toward a more psychologically safe and supportive work environment for all nurses. And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
You really don't. If you're looking for a community of like-minded nurses, head over to healthcarenurses.net and check out our Nurses Link Up app, available on Apple and Google Play.
Yes, it's a fantastic way to connect, share experiences, and find support on your journey.
Really is.
We're all in this together. And together, we can create a nursing profession that prioritizes well-being, fosters growth, and empowers nurses to really thrive. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into psychological safety. We hope you found it insightful and empowering.
And remember, even small steps can lead to big changes. Start today, keep practicing, and never stop advocating for a more psychologically safe and supportive work environment for yourself and for all nurses.
Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast.